At a post-holiday gathering with my wife's friends, I accidentally discovered something that changed my life. Michelle, my wife of 20 years, had been unfaithful during the early years of our relationship. I'm David, 43, and this is the story of how broken trust can destroy even the best memories. Michelle and I were high school sweethearts. She was a senior and I was a junior. We first connected during AP Physics study sessions. Her laugh was so contagious it echoed through the library, often earning us playful scolds from Mrs. Patterson, the librarian who wasn't as strict as she seemed. Those early days were innocent and full of joy, sharing fries at the local diner, studying together until closing time, and stealing quick kisses between classes. I'll never forget the night I asked her to be my girlfriend at the winter formal. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and under the dim disco lights, she said yes. It was perfect, untouchable, or so I thought. When Michelle left for college 2 states away, we promised to make it work. I drove up every other weekend and worked extra shifts at my uncle's auto shop to afford gas money. We talked late into the night, planning our future. The distance was hard, but I believed in us, or at least, I believed in my commitment. Everything unraveled after a casual dinner party this past Christmas. Michelle invited some old college friends over, and the evening started off well. Over plates of her famous lasagna and a few glasses of wine, the conversation turned to how couples met. Michelle briefly mentioned high school, but didn't elaborate. That's when her former roommate, Jessica, casually commented on how surprising it was that we'd made it through our wild college years. I laughed it off, joking about my supposedly wild days, even though my college life was mostly work and study. Then another friend, Mandy, started telling a story. Remember that time in sophomore year when, but Michelle cut her off abruptly, saying she didn't want to discuss old college memories. Her reaction was strange, and the silence in the room felt heavy. I clarified that we had been together since high school, but the awkward tension only grew. Jessica avoided my gaze, and Mandy suddenly became fascinated with her wine glass. As the night wrapped up and the guests were leaving, Mandy's husband, Mark, pulled me aside in the foyer. "Look, man," he spoke in a low, serious tone. "You really need to have an honest conversation with Michelle about her college years. Some things need to be addressed." His words hit me like a punch in the stomach, leaving me hollow and uneasy. On the drive home after dropping off our last guest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I asked Michelle what Mark had meant. At first, she brushed it off, saying it wasn't important. But when I pushed for more answers, she became defensive, insisting that the past was in the past. Her reaction only deepened my suspicions. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I made a decision. "I'm going to stay at my brother's until you're ready to tell me the truth about what happened in college," I said, packing some clothes into an overnight bag. Michelle stood in the doorway, her face carefully blank, but her hands fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. "You're overreacting," she said. "It was 20 years ago. None of it matters now." But it did matter. It mattered because whatever happened was significant enough for her friends to remember it decades later. It mattered because she couldn't look me in the eye when I asked about it. And most of all, it mattered because, for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I couldn't trust her. I felt like I was living with a stranger. That night, I stayed at my brother Sonny's house, tossing and turning on his guest bed as my mind raced with possibilities. The next morning, Michelle showed up looking anxious and disheveled. Sonny quickly made himself scarce, heading to the grocery store to give us some privacy. Sitting in my brother's living room, Michelle finally broke down. Her confession came in pieces, each more painful than the last. During her first 2 years of college, she had been intimate with multiple men, at least 12 partners. Some of them, she later introduced to me as her study group friends when I visited her on campus. "It didn't mean anything," she insisted. "We were so young, and the distance made me think we wouldn't actually last." Her words cut deep. I had driven 4 hours every other weekend to see her, worked extra shifts to afford those trips, and even skipped my own prom because she said she couldn't stand the idea of me going with someone else. The betrayal went beyond the cheating. One of these men had attended our wedding and had been part of our social circle for years because he'd married one of Michelle's close friends. We had shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and attended events together. All this time, he had known. They had both known. As Michelle kept talking, more painful details came out. There had been a pregnancy scare I'd never known about. She had stayed in touch with several of these men on social media, disguised as innocent connections. During my college visits, some of these men were at the parties or study sessions I joined. She introduced them casually, never letting on about their history. Did they know about me? I asked. Some did, she admitted. With others, I just told them we were high school friends trying to stay in touch. My world spun. Every memory of those visits felt poisoned. How many times had I unknowingly shaken hands with men who had been with my girlfriend just days before? How many study groups, pizza runs, and campus events had I shared with people who knew I was being deceived? Sonny came home from his conveniently long grocery trip to find me sitting alone. Michelle had left after her confession. He didn't ask for details. He just handed me a beer and sat with me in silence. That silence meant more than any words could have. The next few days passed in a blur. I filed for divorce on January 15th, shocking both of our families. Our kids, Cameron, 19, and Sophia, 17, were away at the time. Cam was in college, and Sophie was at a winter sports training camp. We decided to wait until they were home to tell them in person. Our families reacted predictably. Michelle's parents, who had always treated me like a son, insisted that everyone makes mistakes and that 20 years of marriage shouldn't be thrown away over ancient history. Even my own mother suggested I take time to process before making a final decision. But they didn't understand. This wasn't just about physical infidelity. It was about 2 decades of lies and carefully maintained deceptions. Every time we had reminisced about our college years, every time we talked about our journey as a couple, every time we told our kids about staying true to your first love, it had all been built on lies. We started therapy almost immediately. At first, we went together, trying to see if there was anything left to save in our marriage. During the second session, Michelle tried to justify her actions, saying that sleeping with multiple partners during a long-distance relationship was normal college behavior and that I was overreacting. Would you have considered it normal if I had done the same? I asked. Her silence was deafening. The therapist gently pointed out the double standard. Michelle had insisted I not date anyone during our time apart, had made me promise to stay faithful, and even joked that her dad would come after me if I cheated. She had also discouraged me from going to my own prom with a female friend. In one especially emotional session, Michelle admitted something that completely broke me. I didn't think you'd ever find out, she said. I thought I was protecting our relationship by keeping it a secret. That's when it hit me. She wasn't sorry for betraying me. She was only sorry she got caught. The hardest part was telling our kids. We waited until Cameron, 19, was home from college for winter break, and Sophia, 17, was back from her training camp. Michelle wanted us to present a united front, but I insisted on complete honesty. We sat them down in our living room, the same place where we'd shared so many happy family memories, like Christmas mornings and game nights. Cameron, always perceptive, immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation. "Is someone sick?" he asked, his eyes darting between us. Sophia sat quietly, already clutching the throw pillow she'd had since she was little, a comfort object for difficult moments. "No one's sick," I said. "Your mother and I are getting divorced." The silence that followed felt like it stretched forever. Then Sophia, our strong, competitive daughter, asked the question that took the wind out of both of us. "Dad, did you cheat on Mom?" I can still see the look on Michelle's face as it crumbled. That moment was a painful reminder of the image we had created as a couple. Michelle, the devoted wife and mother, and me, the one who had been working late nights on big projects recently. "No, sweetheart," Michelle said softly. "I was the one who was unfaithful. A long time ago, before you were born." What followed was a carefully edited version of the truth. We spared the kids the explicit details, but explained that trust had been broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. Cameron, who was studying psychology in college, asked surprisingly mature questions about long-term deception and its effects on relationships. Sophia, on the other hand, just cried, clutching her old pillow as her tears soaked into it. The aftermath was messy. Cameron dove into research, sending me articles about trauma and betrayal. Sophia, however, began acting out. She skipped swim practice, which had been her passion since she was 6, and her grades started to drop. Her guidance counselor even called, worried about her sudden withdrawal from friends and activities. Around this time, more details about Michelle's past came to light. In a guilt-ridden conversation, her old roommate Mandy admitted that 12 partners was a conservative estimate. She told me about parties I'd never known about and how Michelle had kept separate social circles that I never crossed paths with during my visits. "We thought you knew," Mandy said during what felt like her own confession over coffee. "Michelle told us you two had an understanding about seeing other people. It wasn't until your wedding that I realized she lied to me too." Therapy sessions continued, but now they focus on co-parenting instead of reconciliation. During one session, Michelle revealed something that erased any lingering doubt I had about the divorce. She admitted that, 10 years ago, when our intimacy had hit a rough patch, she had grown distant because my attempts to spice things up reminded her of her college experiences. "I couldn't separate the memories," she said in therapy. "When you suggested trying new things, all I could think about was college, and then I felt guilty. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. For 2 years, I had blamed myself for our struggles, thinking I wasn't exciting enough, creative enough, or attentive enough. Meanwhile, she had been hiding secrets that tainted even our most private moments. Then came the final straw. During a mediation session to divide our assets, Michelle casually mentioned that she had gone on a date with a co-worker. She had claimed the co-worker was just a friend during our marriage. Now, she wasn't apologetic, just worried about how dating before the divorce was finalized might impact the proceedings. The divorce process moved surprisingly quickly. Our first mediation session was scheduled for early February, just weeks after I discovered the truth. I hired a divorce attorney recommended by one of my brother's colleagues. Her first words set the tone. "We're not here for revenge. We're here to help you rebuild your life." On paper, dividing our assets seemed straightforward. 2 cars, 1 house, retirement accounts, and 20 years of shared belongings. But every item carried emotional weight. The breakfast nook table where we helped Cameron with his college applications. The garden swing where Sophia practiced her French vocabulary. Each possession felt tainted by the lies that had built our marriage. During one particularly tense mediation session, I asked for my grandmother's china set, something Michelle had always claimed as hers, since my grandmother taught her to make pierogi with those dishes. "You never even use them," she snapped. "No," I replied, "but they're the only things I've left of my grandmother that aren't tainted by our marriage." The room went silent. Even the mediator looked uncomfortable. It was the only time I let my bitterness show so openly. Michelle's face crumpled as my words hit her. My individual therapy sessions became a lifeline. In one session, I broke down completely while describing a dream I'd had recently. I was back in college, driving those 4 hours to visit Michelle, I told my therapist. But in the dream, the road kept getting longer. I could hear Michelle laughing with other people, but I could never find her. "What do you think that dream is telling you?" she asked. "That I was always chasing something that wasn't real," I answered, feeling the weight of the realization as I spoke. The children's reactions continued to change. Cameron, who had initially been calm and analytical, finally broke down during a weekend visit. He was helping me pack up my home office when he found an old photo album from his 10th birthday. Was anything real? He asked, his voice shaking. He asked, were all our happy memories just pretend? I held my son as he cried, something I hadn't done since he was a little boy. The love was real, I assured him. The love for you and your sister was always real. Sometimes good things can come out of complicated situations. Sophia's struggles showed in a different way. Her grades kept slipping, and she began spending more time in my temporary apartment than at the family home with Michelle. One evening, while eating takeout Chinese food, she confessed. Mom's dating someone from work, she said, pushing her food around the plate. The guy, she said, was just a friend. He comes over for dinner sometimes when I'm there. She acts like everything's normal, like we're just supposed to accept it. The fact that Michelle was dating didn't shock me anymore. What hurt was seeing my daughter struggle with the sudden collapse of our family. Through therapy, I learned to help Sophia work through her emotions without turning her against her mother. My own healing took unexpected turns. At my therapist's suggestion, I joined a divorce support group. At first, I was skeptical, but I found comfort in sharing stories with people who understood the pain of long-term betrayal. Hearing their experiences helped me realize that while my pain was deeply personal, I wasn't alone in navigating this journey. As spring arrived, the divorce proceedings moved into their final stages. Each day brought new challenges, but also moments of clarity. I started noticing changes in myself. I was sleeping better, laughing more, and had stopped checking my phone for messages from Michelle. The crushing weight of betrayal didn't vanish, but it became easier to carry. One Wednesday evening, after an especially draining therapy session, I sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at our old wedding photo, still tucked into the visor. 20 years of memories filtered through a different lens. That's when I realized I wasn't just mourning the end of my marriage. I was mourning the story I thought we had. The children's healing moved slowly with ups and downs. Cameron threw himself into his studies, but started calling me more often, usually late at night when his thoughts kept him awake. During one of those conversations, he admitted, "Dad, how do you ever trust anyone again? How do you know what's real?" I thought carefully before answering. Trust isn't about being certain, I told him. I said, it's about being brave enough to face uncertainty, but choosing to trust anyway. The key is making sure the person you trust is worthy of that choice. Sophia's journey took a different turn. After weeks of falling grades and missed swim practices, she finally agreed to see a therapist who specialized in helping teenagers through family transitions. Within a month, she was back at the pool. The water doesn't lie. She told me one evening, it's the only place where everything makes sense right now. The finalization of the divorce came faster than I expected. Michelle had been eager to settle quickly, likely because of her growing relationship with her coworker. During our last mediation session, she made an unexpected confession. "I never thought I deserved you," she said after signing the final document. "Even in college, I kept waiting for you to find someone better. Maybe that's why I did what I did, to prove I wasn't worth your faithfulness." Her words should have moved me, but instead, I felt detached. 20 years too late, I thought but kept it to myself. I simply nodded, gathered my copies of the paperwork, and left. The house sold quickly in the spring market. Watching movers pack up 2 decades of shared life into separate trucks felt surreal. Every item carried memories. The coffee maker we bought for our 5th anniversary, the worn leather armchair where I read bedtime stories to the kids, the family photos we now had to divide. One Saturday morning, while sorting through the garage, I found an old shoebox filled with letters we'd written during our college years. Reading them now, I saw all the signs I had missed. The changing tone of her words, vague mentions of new friends, the increasing gaps between letters. The young man who wrote those passionate replies, who drove hours every other weekend, who believed so deeply in their love. I barely recognized him anymore. My new apartment slowly started to feel like home. The kids helped me decorate, adding their own personal touches. Cameron hung his abstract art prints in the living room, and Sophia displayed her collection of swim medals proudly in the study. I bought new furniture, chose fresh colors, and created a space that reflected who I was becoming, not who I had been. The healing process brought unexpected challenges. The first time I ran into one of Michelle's old college friends at the grocery store, I left my cart and walked out. But each incident like that became easier to handle. My therapist helped me understand that these moments were a normal part of processing 2 decades of hidden truths. 6 months after that fateful dinner party, I was finally starting to feel whole again. I sat in my new study, finishing the last of the divorce paperwork. The evening light filtered through windows that were now solely mine, casting shadows on a life I was slowly rebuilding. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined, but also more enlightening. Therapy had shifted from crisis management to personal growth. During one session, my therapist asked me to focus on what I had gained, not just what I had lost. "You've been dwelling on the 20 years of deception," she said. "But what about the strength you've shown these past months? The deeper relationships you've built with your children? The self-respect you've reclaimed?" She was right. Despite the pain, or maybe because of it, my bonds with Cameron and Sophia had grown in ways I hadn't expected. Our Sunday family dinners, now held in my apartment, had become more honest and meaningful. We talked about real things, their fears, their dreams, and their struggles with trust and relationships. Cameron, now in his final year of college, decided to focus his psychology thesis on the impact of long-term deception in families. "Dad," he told me during one of our late-night calls, "I used to think love was about grand gestures and romantic stories. Now I understand it's about daily choices and honest conversations." Sophia also found her way through swimming, but it became more than a sport for her. It became therapy. "The pool is the only place where everything makes sense," she told me. Each lap became a way for her to process her emotions. Her hard work paid off when she qualified for the state championships. When she won her event, both Michelle and I were there, sitting in separate sections of the bleachers, but both genuinely proud of her resilience. The support group I attended continued to be a source of strength. One evening, a new member asked how I could seem so calm about everything. "I'm not calm," I admitted. "I'm still angry and hurt, but I've learned that holding on to that anger only keeps me tied to the betrayal. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let the past control your future." My relationship with Michelle also evolved. We managed to create a cordial co-parenting arrangement, focused entirely on the kids' well-being. We lived separate lives, but were able to attend family events without drama. The kids noticed and appreciated our efforts to give them stability. The last real conversation Michelle and I had about our marriage happened during a co-parenting mediation session. For the first time, she let down her defenses about her college years. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said. "I'm starting to understand why I did what I did. It wasn't about you. It was about my insecurities, my fear of commitment, and my need for validation. I know that doesn't make it right, but I want you to know I'm working on myself." I appreciated her honesty, but I realized it no longer had the power to hurt or heal me. My recovery didn't depend on her understanding or remorse anymore. Life kept moving forward. I focused on my career, started bowling, something I'd always wanted to try, and even joined a hiking group. When someone eventually asked me out for coffee, I was surprised to find that I was ready to say yes. It wasn't about rushing into a new relationship. It was about being open to new possibilities. Cameron graduated with honors, and his thesis received special recognition. During his graduation dinner, I couldn't have been prouder of him, not just for his accomplishments, but for the thoughtful, resilient young man he'd become. He made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "To my dad, who taught me that integrity isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you handle the truth when it finally comes to light." Sophia's swimming journey took her to nationals, and she started receiving college recruitment letters. She chose schools based on their programs, not their distance from home, a decision both Michelle and I fully supported. She was learning to make choices for herself, not to please her parents. Looking back now, I realize that discovering the truth about those college years wasn't just about uncovering infidelity. It was about facing the reality that sometimes the stories we build our lives around aren't real. The challenge isn't just surviving the discovery. It's about learning to rebuild something new and authentic from the ruins of what we thought we had. I don't regret my years with Michelle. Despite the deception, those years gave me my children, taught me valuable lessons about resilience, and ultimately helped me understand myself better. But I've also learned that love without honesty is like a house built on sand. It might look beautiful, but it can't survive the test of time. Today, I'm not the same person who sat in shock that night, listening to old college stories. I'm stronger, wiser, and more authentic in my relationships, with others and with myself. The pain hasn't disappeared entirely, and it probably never will. But it no longer defines me or my story. My journey continues, but now I move forward with clear eyes and an open heart, ready for whatever life has in store. The truth may have shattered the illusion of a perfect marriage, but it also set me free. Free to build a life based on something far more valuable. Genuine self-worth and uncompromising honesty. The end of my marriage wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter written by me, in my own words, on my own terms. And for the first time in 20 years, every word of it is true.